Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
The husband decided to observe his wife because of mental doubts, but for what? Today's story with a similar plot. Enjoy it! Webster's dictionary definition of the word suspicion is considerably lacking in the ability to clearly indicate the insidiousness that operates on the trapped mind. At the very beginning, suspicion is more like a tiny worm that penetrates the psyche and takes up residence there. It may lie dormant for weeks or months, but it never dies. It sleeps quietly in the recesses of the mind, waiting to be fed with new doubts. Suspicion is the dark side of the mind. Where there is suspicion, there is no joy or happiness. It can paralyze its victim to the point of inaction or induce a state of torpor that deprives the victim of the ability to reason correctly. Why am I so obsessed with the word suspicion? The simple answer is that all the devastating events of the last 3 months began with a small, unexpected observation that planted a worm of suspicion in my mind. Until this event occurred, for 16 years I had never had the slightest doubt about my wife's fidelity. 5 days a week, I wake up before my wife and children. I've formed this habit that forces me to slip out of bed and quietly move to the gym located in the basement. I have several modern pieces of exercise equipment that allow me to exercise in peace for half an hour or more while the rest of the family sleeps upstairs. A vigorous workout on the back and treadmill awakens my entire body. It was Thursday morning when I woke up a little earlier than usual. Instead of lying in bed for another 15 minutes, I got up and headed to the gym. I finished my workout early and headed upstairs to shower and get dressed for work. When I entered the bedroom, Katie was not in bed. In one swift motion, I opened the bathroom door and stepped inside. Katie stood there, getting ready to put on her bra. Her smooth, firm breasts rose slowly as she inhaled and exhaled. I smiled at her, and then my eyes noticed a strange dark black and blue mark on Katie's left breast next to her areola. The mark was oval in shape, about the size of a $50. My eyes left the dark mark and settled on Katie's surprised face. For about 20 milliseconds, there was an expression that I had never seen in Katie's eyes. A strong feeling of guilt flashed through them as her mind registered the fact that I had just seen a dark mark on her chest. It was as if I had caught her doing something obscene. The look of guilt quickly turned to one of shame as she turned away from me and began putting on her bra. In that very brief but awkward moment, not a word was spoken. Katie smiled as she walked past me and out of the bathroom. I stood stunned, trying to comprehend the situation that happened during this very short meeting. My mind couldn't escape the sight of the dark mark on Katie's chest. It actually looked like a love bite, a hickey caused by intense sucking on one area of the body. What was it really? Why was it there? Did Katie somehow hurt herself to get that black and blue mark? My mind was unwilling to accept any other alternative explanation for the origin of her bruise. Warm water washed over my body as I stood in the shower. I tried my best to put the incident out of my mind. The best I could do was push it back by starting to think about the workday ahead. At breakfast, Katie was in her usual high spirits, hurriedly getting me and the kids ready for the day. Jason and Chris were nagging each other as usual as they finished breakfast and headed out the door to catch the school bus. "I saw you looking at the bruise on my chest in the bathroom," Katie said when she finally sat down across the table from me. "Yesterday I hurt myself at work. There was an open file drawer that I ran into and hit my chest against. It was actually stupid of me and left a small black and blue mark." Her face was calm and carefree as she shrugged, as if to indicate that there was nothing more to say about the bruise. Normally, I wouldn't have given it any more thought if it weren't for the instant look of guilt in Katie's eyes when I first saw the bruise. It was a look that her explanation could not satisfy in my mind. I nodded my head silently and finished my toast. We hugged and kissed as usual as I left the kitchen and headed to the garage. Katie left for work about 15 to 20 minutes after me. I had a lot on my mind about the client meeting that was scheduled for this morning. The bathroom meeting and Katie's explanation fell off my radar as I drove to work. But without knowing it, a worm of suspicion was born in my mind. It simply appeared there inside and fell asleep. Katie, my beautiful wife of 39 years, and I live what many would call the ideal American lifestyle. We live in a nice upper-middle-class suburban area. We both graduated from college and have professional careers that we constantly balance with each other and our 2 children. Jason, our oldest child, is 13 years old. He is a bundle of energy that rivals the Energizer Bunny. He has high school music lessons, swimming, soccer practices, and soccer games that keep him very busy. Christ is our 11-year-old daughter. She is her daddy's little princess. Even in her early years, she mastered the feminine skills that could bend me over and wrap me around her little finger. Like most father-daughter relationships, I know I'm being manipulated, but when she turns on her sweet charms, I'm helpless. My name is Paul Matthews. I'm a year older than my wife. I've been working for Equity Corp for the last 12 years. My current position is manager of the maintenance department located at the corporate headquarters. My department employs 24 people who perform maintenance tasks ranging from heating and air conditioning equipment to installing computers and telephones. For me, this work is not very stressful. I employ very talented people who know their business better than I do. I rarely have to make any business trips. Once or twice a year, I attend a conference or workshop on innovation in building maintenance. Katie went with me on several of these business trips. Katie is the director of public relations for a local cable television company in our area. The high level of responsibility at work makes Katie feel very good, and her work has also done wonders for her self-esteem. After the birth of our daughter, Katie thought her professional life was over and she would be relegated to the status of housewife and stay-at-home mom. By the time Christ was 3 years old, it became obvious that Katie needed to do some activity outside the home that would be more challenging for her than cleaning up after the kids and cooking. At first, Katie was torn between guilt and depression. She felt guilty that she couldn't cope with the demands of being a full-time mother. However, she was depressed by the fact that her entire college education was being wasted without ever being fully utilized. Everything changed when Katie's sister, Evelyn, moved to our area. Evelyn and Katie were complete opposites. Evelyn Hunter was a consummate mother and homemaker. She had no desire to challenge the world with her business acumen or be eye-catching at the reception desk. She was quite happy with motherhood, and the fact that her husband Todd was the main breadwinner was, in Evelyn's opinion, how life should be. The Hunters have 3 children, a boy and 2 girls. Alan was the eldest, followed by Alexis and Alyssa, his twin sisters. It didn't take long for both of our children to become adopted by their Aunt Evelyn and spend most of their free time at their cousin's house. This was a blessing for Katie. She and Evelyn agreed that Katie could begin a professional career while her sister acted as a foster mother. This was 8 years ago. Katie landed her ideal position at Cable NEX, a local cable television company. She was hired as a human resources manager reporting to the regional managing director. This job was everything Katie had hoped to find in a job. It gave her a sense of accomplishment and, at the same time, some freedom away from the office. One of her main job responsibilities was to interview potential subcontractors for Cable NEX. She had to ensure that any subcontractor hired by Cable NEX complied with all state and federal employment regulations. A few weeks after meeting Katie in the bathroom with a bruised chest, I was reviewing the technical specifications in a proposal for a new telephone exchange system for corporate offices and discovered that the draft proposal had omitted a number of important points. I called to account the 2 employees directly responsible for drawing up the technical specifications. Although it was unusual for these 2 employees to screw up, I gave them a good talking to and sent them to correct the proposal. This incident frayed my already tense nerves. If I had not discovered the error in the design, the entire order would have been seriously compromised. I decided that for the rest of the day, I needed to leave the office and do some stress-relieving exercise at the gym. As I left the office, I told my secretary that I would be gone for the rest of the day and that she should only call me if there was a 9/11 type tragedy at the company. She smiled and silently nodded her head. The next 2 hours were spent doing an intense workout at the fitness club, which included swimming 100 laps in a large pool. A few minutes in the steam room and a nice hot shower made me feel like a new person. When I left the fitness club, it was 2:10 p.m. For a moment, I thought about going back to the office, but my refreshed mind quickly rejected this idea, letting the group work on their own for the rest of the day. As I was driving home, an unpleasant thought flashed through my head. I have read and heard stories of husbands returning home unannounced to find their wives in the bedroom with their lover. I smiled at the thought. Katie would never cheat on me. Then the little worm of suspicion in my soul raised its ugly head, and the thought of guilt in Katie's gaze gave me a twinge of doubt for a split second. I turned into the driveway. There were no unfamiliar cars on it. The garage door rose, and there were no cars in the garage either. The kids were still at school, and Katie had to be at work for 3 more hours. When I entered the quiet house, I had peace and quiet at my complete disposal. Quickly changing into sweatpants and a shirt, I went into the office and turned on some light jazz. Before I could sit down in a deep chair to relax, the phone rang. Damn, I thought to myself as I stood up to answer the phone. It would be better if it wasn't a call from the office. Hello, I said, picking up the phone. Is this the Matthews house? A female voice spoke at the other end of the line. At first, I thought it was a telemarketer making one of those annoying sales calls. Yes, it is. Who is calling? There was irritation in my voice as I confronted the caller. Oh, sorry to bother you. I wanted to talk to Katie Matthews. The woman's voice sounded very apologetic. She's still at work. Can I give her a message? I wanted to end this break and return to my solitude and a glass of Jack Daniels. I would be grateful to you. This is Nancy Cobb. I wanted to call her and tell her about the cost of repairing my car. My mind sped up for a minute. Katie didn't tell me anything about Nancy Cobb. Can you give me information, Nancy? Now my voice changed to a more pleasant tone as my curiosity reached its peak. Yes, tell Katie that the body shop said the tail light and fender dent would cost no more than $550. Nancy's voice sounded like that of a middle-aged woman. Okay, Nancy, tell me more about the accident and what happened. My voice sounded carefree, hoping that Nancy would tell me all the details. Well, it happened last week on Tuesday when Katie backed into my car in the parking lot. She did not cause any damage to her car, but the edge of her bumper broke the rear light lens and left a small dent on the fender. It wasn't too bad, so Katie told me to get an estimate, and she would pay the cost of the repairs. She didn't want to report it to the insurance company, and I can understand why. These insurance companies raise premiums at every opportunity. To me, it sounded like 2 women solving all the world's problems in a parking lot. I can imagine that accidents like this happen all the time in a mall parking lot, I said to Nancy, scribbling a note for Katie. Yeah, I think accidents happen in mall parking lots all the time, Nancy said. I was about to end the conversation when she added, but this happened in the parking lot of the Pine Tree Motel. Bam! At that last statement, my mind lit up. So, a week ago on Tuesday, Katie was at a motel and drove her car into yours. Is that right, Nancy? I tried to make my voice sound natural and hide the tension that was squeezing my chest. Yes, that's right. I came to visit my sister who was staying at the motel. My husband doesn't like my sister at all, so I have to meet her at the motel whenever she comes into town. I was just getting out of the car when Katie pulled out of her parking space. She must not have noticed my car behind her when she crashed into it. It's good that she wasn't driving very fast, otherwise, the damage would have been greater. I wondered for a moment what question to ask Nancy next. There was too much chaos in my head, so I just asked, is there anything else about the accident that you can remember, Nancy? Well, nothing but thank the man who came up to look at the damage and said that my car was still quite drivable. But he also said that I would have to fix it before the police gave me a ticket for driving with a broken tail light. Was Katie upset by the accident? I heard her take a deep breath, thinking for a moment. Yes, until that kind gentleman came over to assess the damage and was kind enough to reassure both of us regarding this incident. Did this man work at the motel? I asked. No, I don't think so. In fact, I think Katie knows him, although she didn't say so. I wanted to ask her if this man looked like a kind gentleman, but this could cause some suspicion on Nancy's part. She might think she gave me more information than she should have. Well, thank you, Nancy. I will pass this information on to Katie when she gets home. Does she have your phone number? I gave her the number when she gave me her business card. I also asked her for her home number, which she wrote down on the back of her card just in case she lost your phone number. Nancy, could you give it to me again? My home phone number is 512-343-2552 and my cell phone number is 527-348-762. Thank you, Nancy. I'll pass this information on to Katie as soon as she gets home tonight. We said goodbye and hung up. I leaned back in my chair and looked at the ceiling. Thoughts were racing through my head. Now what? What does all of this mean? Katie didn't tell me anything about the car accident, but she probably would have told me about this as soon as it happened. Besides, why would Katie be at the Pine Tree Motel on a Tuesday afternoon? The answer could be as simple as her interviewing a new subcontractor at the motel restaurant. There shouldn't have been anything secret about her being at the motel during the day. I was trying to make sense of this latest disturbing piece of information that had just come to my attention. There could be 100 different innocuous answers that could explain her presence at that motel. Nevertheless, in the depths of my consciousness, a worm of suspicion began to stir again. This may be the worst option. Perhaps Katie has a lover. How can one know this for sure? It took 2 more Jack Daniels to calm my nerves. By that time, the children had already come running home from school. They said their usual "Hey Dad" and headed upstairs to their rooms. About half an hour later, Christy came down and went into the kitchen to heat up the dinner Katie had prepared before leaving for work. I was still sitting in the deep chair trying to relax when I heard the garage door open and Katie enter. She came over and kissed the top of my head. "You came home early, Paul. Is something wrong at work?" she asked, running her hand over my cheek. "Nothing special, just left early to go to the gym for a workout and a swim. I needed some stress relief." My smile gave no hint of the turmoil in my head. Christy called out that dinner was about to be ready to be served, so Katie turned away and went upstairs to change. Dinner time was the usual chatter between the 4 of us as we ate and talked about our day. Jason was talking about a science project he was working on with his high school friend Ethan. Christy was chatting about her English class and her essay that was due next week. It was typical of a suburban family enjoying each other and talking about the important events of the day. Katie mentioned that her company is expanding its coverage area and she's very busy recruiting subcontractors to help install cables. I sat listening to all this wonderful chatter and thought what a wonderful family I was part of. "What about you, Dad? How was your day?" Christy asked, giving me her daddy's little girl smile. It was a little more stressful at work than usual. There was a serious mistake in the latest phone specifications. I almost lost my temper with the group. Instead, I gave them instructions on exactly what needed to be fixed and then left the office for the rest of the day. I went to the gym to get a good workout, de-stressing, and then returned home to relax with my loving family. I smiled back at Christy. "Tomorrow will certainly be a better day," I added, winking at her as she giggled at my remark. I looked across the table at Katie and then spoke. "Oh, by the way, Katie, Nancy Cobb called this afternoon while I was here to tell you that she received an estimate for her car repairs." Nothing in the tone of my voice betrayed the slightest hint of concern. Katie almost choked on the food she was swallowing at that moment. Our eyes met for a second, and the look of guilt suddenly appeared in her eyes again, the same look that appeared when I walked into the bathroom and saw a bruise on her chest. Shock and instant fear showed on her face. "She wanted you to call her tonight. Her car is in the auto repair shop and she wants to talk to you about the price. The original estimate is around $550. There was no accusation in my voice as I waited for Katie's answer. I could see Katie's mind going 100 miles an hour as she mentally formulated her answer. She lowered her eyes to look at the food on her plate, but it was obvious that she could not continue to look me straight in the eyes. "What else did Nancy say about the accident?" Katie finally asked in a quiet voice. "Mom had an accident?" Jason blurted, his eyes widening at the prospect of some exciting news. "I think so, Jason. Looks like Mom backed into this lady's car in the parking lot," I interrupted Katie's response. "God, Mom, when did this happen? Was anyone hurt?" It was Christy's turn to intervene in the conversation. "Slow down, both of you. Give your mom a chance to tell us all about it." I tried to calm the kids so Katie could talk. "Did Nancy say anything else about the accident?" Katie asked the question again. "As far as I can remember, no. She looked like she was in a hurry or something," I lied, something I've never done with my wife. Was it a little white lie or a lie to trap Katie? She seemed momentarily relieved. "It was just a minor collision in the parking lot. No one was hurt, and my car was not damaged. My car's bumper smashed the lady's tail light and left a small dent in her fender. That's all that happened, Katie said. There were no further details. I was slightly disappointed. When did this happen, Mom, and where? Jason jumped up again with his questions. It happened last week on Wednesday. I went to the mall to buy a birthday present for Carol at work. It was her birthday on Thursday, and I needed to buy her a gift, Katie replied in a calm, businesslike tone. You were at the shopping center and didn't take me with you? Christy looked at her mother in surprise. Shopping at the mall came first for Christy after a sleepover with all her girlfriends. I went to the shopping center during lunch. It was a quick trip there and back. I bought Carol a silk scarf along with a keychain for her bracelet, Katie replied as Christy pouted childishly. Maybe Nancy was wrong about the day. Maybe it was Wednesday and not Tuesday as she said on the phone. But I don't think she could be so wrong about where the accident occurred. Why did Katie need to change the place and day? The worm of suspicion crept deeper and deeper into my consciousness. That look in Katie's eyes, that shocked expression on her face, what's going on behind those eyes? What is my loving wife trying to hide from me? So, it wasn't anything special, right, Mom? Jason said disappointedly. I think he was hoping for a more dramatic accident. The broken tail light didn't interest him much. That's right, Jason. It's okay. It's just that Carol's gift will cost me more than I was actually going to pay, Katie said with a soft smile on her face. She seemed to regain her composure very quickly. I did not pursue the issue further. Later that evening, the children were in their rooms doing homework. Katie went into our bedroom to call Nancy back. Maybe she wanted to talk to Nancy alone. I didn't ask why she needed privacy to make the call. The stereo was playing, and the TV was off as I sat in the office. There was an open book in my lap and a Jack Daniels in my hand. At this time, my mind was in its most active analysis mode. Over the past few months, I have slowly and methodically tried to find any additional clues or unusual events that could further support the theory of infidelity that was forming in my mind. Nothing but this bruise during these months would have made me suspect that something had changed in our relationship. Our nightlife didn't suddenly get better or worse. Katie was still the same loving and attentive wife. She didn't dress differently, she didn't go on business trips, and she didn't work late. So why doesn't this suspicion go away in my head? But there was that look in her eyes, twice, a look I've never seen before. The look of surprise and guilt on her face, which appeared only for a fleeting second, could not be explained. And now a lie about a car accident. These ugly thoughts made my pectoral muscles tense. I told Nancy to fix her car and I'll pay the repair shop once the job is done, Katie said as she entered the room. Her words brought my thoughts back to the present. She gave me an inquisitive look, as if expecting me to say something more about the accident. I did not comment or ask any questions. I'm sorry I didn't mention the accident on the day it happened, dear. I was just really stressed about the incident and didn't want you to worry about it. I was going to tell you after Nancy called me. Looks like you got her call first. I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. Katie sat down on the couch opposite me. I had the feeling that something was still bothering her, but she didn't know how to broach the topic. Maybe she found out that Nancy told me where and when the accident actually happened. Maybe she wanted me to ask her about the inconsistencies in her story. I'm glad you settled your issue with Nancy. I'm glad something more serious didn't happen. That was my simple answer. After my response, Katie seemed to calm down a little. Aren't you going to watch Lost on TV tonight? It's tonight, isn't it? Her question seemed to sum up the accident. There was no point in dwelling on this sensitive issue. No, I think I'll skip watching it for now. I have enough mysteries and intrigue to deal with these days. I'll let Jack and the rest of the crew on the island fend for themselves this week. I smiled at her and took another sip of my drink. Well, then I guess I'll go upstairs and run myself a hot bubble bath. I'll soak until my skin turns pink, Katie said, getting up from the couch and walking towards me with a smile on her face. She leaned over and kissed my forehead. Could you check on the kids before you go to bed? I want to make sure their homework is done and that they don't stay up too late. Her voice was still the same sweet, loving voice that I had come to know and love over the past 16 years. "Of course, my love. I'll crack the whip if I have to tame these two monsters of ours. Now go and soak in the bath." I made a kissing sound with my lips and she smiled and headed towards the stairs. "Don't stay up late, handsome. I'll be waiting for you in bed," she giggled, walking up the steps. I felt my arousal begin to grow. Katie is a very hot and passionate woman when she's in the mood, and a hot bubble bath always lifts her spirits. I knew we were in for a hot night between the sheets when I got to bed. My first thought was how these suspicions might affect my intimate feelings for the woman I love and worship. I had no tangible evidence of any infidelity on her part, nothing but that itchy worm of suspicion that just wouldn't go away. An hour later, I turned off everything downstairs and went upstairs to check on the kids. Jason was engrossed in the video game he was holding in his hand. "Okay, young man, show me your homework," I said, quickly snatching the Game Boy from his hands. "Oh, Dad, I was just about to go to level 10. Now you've ruined everything," Jason said with a pout on his face. "Okay, young man, show me your homework," I said, quickly snatching the Game Boy from his hands. "Oh, Dad, I was just about to go to level 10. Now you've ruined everything," Jason said with a pout on his face. "You'll have all summer to get to level 12 if that's your goal, and right now, we are trying to help you finish 5th grade at school," I said, poking him lightly in the ribs. "Now for your homework, young man." Christy was already in bed. She heard a noise from her brother's bedroom and now wanted to play the role of Daddy's little girl with me. It always worked. I kissed her goodnight and turned off the light. The intim that night with Katie was incredible. The smell of her sweet, perfumed body intoxicated me. There was no distance between our thoughts or our emotions when we made love. The only thing that mattered was the love we shared in that moment. We didn't need words. We just cuddled up to each other in a lover's embrace and fell into a peaceful sleep. That Saturday, Katie and her sister went shopping for the girls. The children played upstairs with their cousins while Todd sat at home with the baby. Fortunately, I didn't have to do anything special, and the quiet house was all mine. Since I was feeling uneasy, I decided to wash both of our cars. Evelyn arrived in her SUV, so Katie's car was still in the garage. It was a nice day outside, so I took my time washing and vacuuming both cars. I cleaned the carpets and then washed the trunks of both cars. While vacuuming the trunk of Katie's car, I saw a small piece of white plastic sticking out from under the edge of the wheel well. I pulled back the carpet and found a white bag lying on top of the spare tire. When I opened the package, my heart almost stopped in my chest. Inside it were several pieces of intimate clothing, including a nicely laced bra, panties, garter belt, and black stockings. Everything looked like it was bought at Victoria's Secret. I've never seen these clothes before. All the sales tags were removed from them, so I realized that they were not exactly new and looked like they had been worn before. The crotch of the panties smelled distinctly like a woman's scent, the smell of Katie. I stood there stunned, looking at the bag full of clothes that had only one purpose. Was I holding a smoking gun in my hand? Was this the missing link in the story that I had spent the last few weeks forcing myself to deny? I put everything back in the bag and returned it to where I found it. I put away the cleaning equipment and put Katie's car back in the garage. Anyone who saw me at that moment would probably think they were watching a robot or a zombie walking around cars. I was in a fog. My mind refused to function properly. There was only chaos and confusion in my mind. Finally, I locked up the house and drove to the corner retail store, where I bought a 6-pack of beer and then drove to the lake. There was a secluded place to park away from the weekend crowds. I sat back, cold beer in hand, and tried to process the events of the last 2 weeks. Until I found the underwear in the trunk of Katie's car, all I had was a vague suspicion that Katie might be unfaithful. Now, after the latest revelation, can there be any doubt about her betrayal? I didn't think there could be any other reasonable explanation, and yet I had no idea what to do next. Should I meet her face to face immediately, demand explanations and proof of her fidelity? Should I remain silent until I have certain, indisputable evidence? But even then, what should I do with this terrible evidence? Should I divorce her? My mind, which is usually very good at analyzing problems, failed me miserably. There seemed to be no win-win solution to the dilemma. If Katie had actually cheated on our marriage, It took several hours to finish the 6th can of beer. The sun was setting below the horizon over the lake. I felt a slight excitement from the alcohol but was far from intoxicated. I also realized that I was hungry and needed to go home. But what should I do when I get home? What kind of existence will I have to lead to maintain the status quo? The missing part of the equation was Katie's explanation of all my suspicions. Could there be rational reasons for her that would dispel all my doubts? I arrived home and found Katie talking on the phone. She turned and looked at me as I entered the house. Her face was full of anxiety and worry. "Oh my God, Paul, where have you been all day long? You made us very worried. When Evelyn and I returned from the store, you weren't here. Todd didn't know where you were either." There was an alarm in her voice. When she hung up, I walked into the kitchen and took a glass of cold water from the refrigerator. Our eyes never met until I sat down at the table. I was on the lake. I had a lot on my mind that I needed to think about and try to figure out. I looked at her, and our eyes met. I saw fear in her eyes. There was fear mixed with anxiety as her mind tried to evaluate the words of the person sitting at the table. "What happened, Paul? Are you sick or something?" Her words were full of worry, but they didn't convey the fear she felt inside her. "Yes, you can say that I am sick, but this is not a physical illness. My soul hurts." At that moment, Katie's stoic demeanor crumbled before my eyes. She had no doubt that I knew her secret. She slowly sat down on one of the chairs in the kitchen. "What's his name? You love him?" My voice was calm, no anger in the tone or accusing tone. Katie looked at me, and tears welled up in her eyes. "His name is Carl Gehring, and yes, I love him." I sat silently and looked at my sobbing wife. Her brief confession did not stun me. It didn't make me feel sick to my stomach. The suspicion I had about her infidelity had just been confirmed, leaving me with an empty emotional shell. "If you love him, then I think this means the end of our marriage." My voice was still calm. "Oh God, no, Paul!" Katie screamed, a frightened expression appearing on her face. "I still love you, Paul. My love for Carl does not diminish the love I have for you." Katie's voice cracked, and her body shook as if she had just been hit by a gust of cold air. "Well, you are deeply mistaken if you think that I will ever agree to the role of a cuckold, and I don't want to live with a woman who confesses her love to another man. I don't see any other choice for us other than divorce." I walked out of the kitchen into the office, where I plopped down in my favorite deep chair. I didn't want to look at my unfaithful wife anymore. For me, the decision to divorce was now a foregone conclusion. It took Katie several minutes to recover enough to speak to me. She sat down on the sofa opposite me and sat in silence for a while before she spoke. "I know this must be a terrible shock for you, Paul, to find out that I was unfaithful to you. But I really think you should listen to my explanation before you end our marriage." She tried to speak in a soft, loving voice, but I simply turned my face away from hers. "Tell me one thing, Katie. Do you still want to have an intimate relationship with this guy Carl?" She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and simply answered, "Yes." "Then there's nothing left of our marriage. Since you are a cheater, I will file for divorce in the morning, and I will seek primary custody of the children. I don't want to expose my young, impressionable children to an adulterous environment. If you want Carl to be your lover, then it must be without custody of the children." My voice took on an aggressive tone. "The time has come to show your position as the head of the family and the offended husband. Kathy's cheating may have hurt my ego, but I wasn't going to give in and let her have the kids. Please, Paul, do not do that. I told you I still love you. I don't want a divorce, and I especially don't want my children taken away from me." Katie was sobbing and shaking again as the reality of my decision sank into her mind. "Your statement, 'I love you,' is a farce since, at the same time, you confess your love for another man. Your actions speak louder than any of your words. Your actions tell me that I am not the man who can fully satisfy you as a woman. I cannot and will not accept cuckold status." I lowered my head and said in a softer voice, "I want you to pack your bags and leave this house immediately. I don't want to be in the same house with you anymore. You have lost your right to live in it. No, Paul, you can't just throw me out like an old shoe. This is my home, my children, and I live here." Katie was almost hysterical when I rose to my feet. This is where I live. I live here with my children. You are an adulteress, __, and I will not allow you to live in the same house with us. I shouted at her as anger rose within me. Now pack your clothes and leave the house. I'm going to take the children from Evelyn, and when I return, I don't want to find you in this house. I walked to the door, turned, and said, I'll be back in an hour so that you won't be here. Tell Evelyn where you'll be staying, and I'll make sure you get the rest of your things. I closed the door behind me as Katie continued to beg me to change my mind. As soon as I walked into the Hunter house, Todd knew something was terribly wrong. He had never seen me so upset. What the hell happened to you? Todd asked, approaching me. Total crap, Todd. Just complete crap, I said, leaning against the wall. As I said this, I slowly turned my head from side to side. Katie has taken a lover and doesn't want to end this affair. It's over for the two of us. I told her to pack some clothes and leave the house. I'll file for divorce in the morning. Todd stood there, stunned by the words I had just spoken. There was never any sign that our marriage was in jeopardy, just the opposite. Katie and I seemed like the perfect married couple with 2 beautiful children. Just then, Evelyn came around the corner and saw us standing in shocked silence. What happened here? Her eyes quickly moved from her husband's face to mine and back. Paul just found out that Katie is cheating on him, Todd said sadly, looking intently at his wife. Do you know anything about this? Katie tells you everything, doesn't she? Evelyn's face couldn't hide the fact that she knew about Katie's secret. She didn't tell me everything, only that she met her long-lost high school sweetheart. She didn't tell me she was sleeping with him. Her voice didn't sound very convincing, so you knew there was something wrong with it, didn't you, Evelyn? I barked at her in an accusing voice. I tried to tell her not to get involved with Carl. Their high school relationship was a thing of the past, and she shouldn't jeopardize her marriage by trying to live out some teenage fantasy. Now her eyes were focused on some point on the floor. She couldn't look me straight in the eyes. How long ago did this happen, Evelyn? I barked at her. About 8 weeks ago, Evelyn said in a low voice. What else do you know? My anger was still building strongly. Katie said that Carl owns a small construction company. He didn't know Kathy worked for Cable Next when he applied for the subcontract work. Katie was shocked when she first saw his name on the application form. Evelyn walked out of the corridor and sat down on the sofa. Her head was lowered as if in embarrassment. After she told me that she met Carl for lunch, she didn't talk about him to me anymore. I was trying to find out if there was anything going on between them. She refused to talk to me about Carl. Evelyn took a deep breath. I had a suspicion that she and Carl were beginning an affair. Todd said nothing when his wife admitted that she knew about the contact between Katie and Carl. At this moment, he had no idea what to do or say. Damn women! I shouted at my daughter-in-law. Even though she's your sister, you should have told Todd or me that something might happen to Katie. Now it's too late, our marriage is over. I told Katie to pack her things and get out of my house. The veins on my neck stood out as my anger spiraled out of control. When Evelyn looked at me, horror flashed in her eyes. You won't throw Katie out into the street. She's your wife, and I know she loves you, Paul, she said, her voice trembling. Now, Evelyn began to cry loudly. She also told me that she loves Carl and that she wants to continue her romance with him. I shouted back at her. This dam deserves to be outside. I knew I needed to get away from Evelyn before my rage got out of control. Where are Jason and Christy? I turned to Todd. They're playing in the backyard, Todd said. I turned and walked to the back door. As I went out to pick up the children, the phone on the far table rang. 2 teenagers ran up to me as soon as they saw me. Come on, gang, let's go get some burgers at Mickey D's, I said with a forced smile on my face. Dad, can 3 come with us? Christy asked with a languid smile on her face. Of course, they can, if their mother and father allow it, I answered. Let's go in and ask them, Christy called out to the others, running into the house. Evelyn was talking on the phone with Katie, I muttered. Why did Aunt Evelyn cry when I entered the house? Christy asked from the back seat of the car. She had a bad day. I think she received some bad news that alarmed her, I answered my daughter. So that's why she said she wanted Alan, Alexis, and Alyssa to stay home today? Dad, Jason interrupted the conversation. I guess so, Jason. There's a lot going on right now that's upsetting a lot of people. We can talk more about this when we get home. Jason and Christy were finishing their fries when I turned away from them and pressed the speed dial button on my cell phone. The phone rang several times, then a woman's voice answered. Hello? It was Evelyn's voice. In a quiet voice, I told her we'd be leaving here soon, and when we get home, Katie better not be there. The children were more interested in what was happening around them to pay any attention to my telephone conversation. Paul, be reasonable. Katie has a serious emotional crisis because of this. She has nowhere to go and doesn't want to be left without her children. She tried to mediate for her sister. Evelyn, I don't care where she goes. She can go live with her new lover. I don't care, fury grew inside me again. She better not be there when we get home, otherwise, the kids will find out the hard way what a cheating their mother really is. I pressed the off button and took a deep breath, trying to suppress my anger. What happened, Dad? Christy asked, seeing the strange expression on my face. I tried my best to smile and act carefree. Nothing special, honey. We'll talk more when we get home. When the three of us returned, the house was empty. Where's Mommy? They both asked when they saw the empty house. She needed to do something. Mommy will be away for a while until everything is settled. I avoided a serious answer to the child's question. Now go upstairs to your rooms. I want your homework done within the next hour. I'll go up to tuck you in and say goodnight. When I walked into the bedroom, I noticed that a lot of her clothes were missing from Katie's side of the main closet. Her cosmetics were also missing from the bathroom vanity. Even though my anger was still at the forefront, I felt a strong sense of loss as I realized the reality of Katie's absence. And yet, I knew that even more painful moments lay ahead. I lay on my back in a dark bedroom and looked at the ceiling. There were so many little things that I had to do in the near future. The most important thing was the emotional health and well-being of both my children. How to tell them that their mother will no longer live with them, that she wouldn't be there to love and comfort them every night, that when they get sick, she won't be there to be the doctor mom. In my own mind, I was struggling with my decision to fight for custody of my children. I wanted them to grow up happy and healthy. Wouldn't they be better off living with their mother and her new lover? Maybe it was my bruised ego, maybe it was actually my devotion to my children, but I soon gave up the idea of giving my children to my unfaithful wife. I will fight tooth and nail to keep them living here with me. The next few days were traumatic and heartbreaking for me. I immediately began divorce proceedings through my lawyer. I was able to obtain a restraining order prohibiting Kathy from having contact with me or the children. Katie hired a lawyer and fought the restraining order, but it took a week or more to get results in the courts. Jason and Christy were now confused and upset by the events that had taken place in their once happy and loving home. I sat down with them and tried to explain that their mom and dad were having serious problems staying married to each other. The children couldn't understand what had happened and why their parents couldn't just kiss and make up. I told them that there are problems that are too serious to simply forget about. I specifically didn't tell them about their mother's new lover. No matter how painful these episodes with the children were, I was determined to stick to my position. When I finally spoke to Katie on the phone a week after I forced her to move out of the house, I made my first threats to her. I said that in our state, there are laws against alienation of affection by a third party. I told Katie that if she continued to fight against my custody of the children, I would press charges against Carl and sue him for alienation of affection and ruining our marriage. I also said that I would report her affair to CableNext's senior management as a conflict of interest on her part. She will likely be fired from her job, and Carl's company will be banned from doing business with CableNext. Kathy continued to beg me to call off the divorce proceedings and allow her to return home. These pleas were met with my sarcastic remarks that she had made her choice. I made it very clear that I would not be a cuckold, nor would I live in an open marriage. The phone call ended with Katie still begging me to change my mind. I then had a long conversation with my sister-in-law about Jason and Chris visiting their cousins and brother. I told her in no uncertain terms that I would not allow Katie in Evelyn's house if there were children there. I have established rules of conduct that will govern my relationship with the Hunter family. Evelyn finally capitulated to my demands for the sake of 5 children. She knew that if I limited or canceled my nephew's visits, both families would suffer. The divorce papers were drafted so that I would remain the primary caregiver and have custody of the children. Kathy took my threat seriously and withdrew her objections to this part of the agreement. She received visitation rights every other weekend, provided that her lover would be absent during these visits. She would pick up and drop off the kids at her sister's house so that I wouldn't have to be there when she came to their house. This mutual agreement allowed the divorce process to continue. A month after Katie moved out of the house, I looked in the bathroom mirror and saw a man who had aged 10 years and 4 weeks. Every evening, the children insisted that I make peace with their mother so that she could return to us. These clashes took a toll on the 3 of us. In addition to losing my wife, I now felt that I was on the verge of losing the love of my children. I took an early leave from work so I could spend more time with my children. Gradually, the tension between the children and me decreased, but I could still see that they missed their mother and their once happy family life. Being a single parent was becoming very stressful for me. I ended up hiring a housekeeper to run the house and do maid work. I also did this to ensure there was an adult at home when the kids got home from school. Margarita was an elderly Hispanic grandmother who accepted the position. She moved into one of the guest bedrooms and immediately took over all the household chores. It didn't take long for Jason and Christy to accept her as their adoptive grandmother. In addition to her household responsibilities, she also began teaching the children Spanish. Quiet stability gradually returned to the Matthews household. The children stopped pressuring me to allow me to return to their mother's house. The children's weekends with their mother soon became part of their daily routine. They seemed to have adjusted better to not having their mother in the same house as them. Coming home after dating her became less stressful for them. When they returned home after visiting Katie, Margarita always prepared their favorite dish, yet this was no longer the same loving family. My life was especially stressful due to the trauma I suffered after discovering Kathy's infidelity and then losing her presence in the house. Deep down, I truly missed her love and companionship. I went about my daily activities at home and at work as best I could. At Tim's, my actions were more like those of a robot than a thinking person. There was a huge hole in my mind and soul. Something very valuable was ripped out of my perfect life, something that may never be replaced. The once close relationship between the Hunters and me was now separated by a very large gulf. The cousins remained very close friends and still spent most of their time together, but the closeness I once had with Evelyn and Todd was almost gone because of the rules I set up weeks ago. Evelyn didn't try to convince me to give Katie another chance. She was torn between loyalty to her sister and the feeling that Katie was solely responsible for the suffering that now reigned in the 2 families. One evening, when I went to pick up the children at Evelyn's, she pulled me aside and handed me a large manila envelope. I know the rules you have set regarding my involvement in this family crisis that you and Katie have, but I'm absolutely sure that you need to read the letter that Katie wrote to you. It's in this envelope and it may contain some answers to the questions you were afraid to ask. Please don't tear it up before you've read it, Paul, she said. She handed me an envelope. I took it reluctantly. I won't bother you anymore about this situation. This only applies to you and Katie. I just beg you to read the letter before the divorce is finalized. You owe it to yourself. I didn't dare talk to Evelyn. We both knew that she had broken my invariable rule about her participation. Instead, I just winced and walked past her to pick up the kids. I left the Hunter house with the chattering children and an envelope in my hand. For several days, I stared at the unopened envelope that I took with me to work. So, supposedly inside it was an explanation and possible confession written by my future ex-wife. Dare I read it? Would the contents of the letter be like salt in a wound and increase my anger towards her? On the 3rd day, I opened the envelope. I sat alone in my office, telling my secretary not to bother me. The envelope contained about a dozen pages. They were written in Kathy's beautiful cursive handwriting. Just seeing her handwriting, I felt a sudden jolt in my chest. At first, I thought about shredding these pages, but I didn't. Slowly, with tears in my eyes, I began to read the first page. My dearest, loving husband, it began. I sincerely want you to read this letter in its entirety before you make any final decisions about the future of our marriage. Since we have not been able to sit down face to face and discuss the situation we currently find ourselves in, my only remedy is to write you this letter and do my best to explain everything regarding this crisis from my point of view. I understand that some of what I have to say may seem contradictory and irrational from your point of view. However, I need to at least do my best to present the facts as I see them. First and foremost, I want you to know that I truly love you today more than the day we got married. You must believe this, even if you doubt everything else that I am forced to say in this letter. These last 16 years have been the best years of my life, and I owe it all to you and our wonderful children. And I sincerely wish to remain your wife for the rest of my life. Secondly, you need to know that none of what has happened lately is your fault. You are the most wonderful husband a woman could ever dream of. Nothing, and I say this with complete confidence, about you or your relationship with me, has brought me into the arms of another man. You satisfied me completely in the bedroom and beyond. What happened was not caused by any flaw in you. Third, I don't have a clear explanation for how or why things turned out the way they did. Never in my wildest dreams or nightmares could I have imagined a scenario that led you and me to this critical turn in our lives. If what follows in this letter seems incoherent or disorganized, please bear with me. This is a difficult story to tell, and I hope I can tell it so that you can fully understand why I'm in this heartbreaking dilemma and why I'm still begging you not to end our marriage. My story begins as a sophomore at Crestview High School. I was a happy young girl who was just beginning to grow into a beautiful young woman. In March of that year, 3 months before the end of the school year, Carl got transferred to Crestview. Carl's father was a U.S. Army major who was sent to help train reserve soldiers at a local armory. The Gehring family moved into a rented house about 3 miles from the high school, in the opposite direction from where I lived. Carl ended up in 3 of my courses: English literature, trigonometry, and biology. From the first week, it became apparent that the school Carl had previously attended was not aligned with Crestview's curriculum. Carl had difficulty keeping up with the rest of the class. One day, at the urging of my best friend Betty, I approached Carl during his lunch break. He was sitting alone. My guess is that he was trying to figure out how to fit in without being seen as an outsider. Carl was a little surprised, and I think somewhat pleased, when I asked if I could sit with him. That first lunch meeting was just getting to know each other. It ended up that Carl and I had lunch every day from then on. Most of the time, Betty joined us. That's when Carl told us about his father, mother, and little sister, Jennifer. During the 20 years that Carl's parents were married, the Gehring family moved throughout the country and to several foreign countries. Such was the life of the family of a career military man. After that first week of lunch meetings, Betty and I began tutoring Carl in classes that he was having trouble keeping up with. The 3 of us formed a study group that helped Carl enough that he advanced to the next grade with a 3.2 GPA. We were all proud of his accomplishments. And yet, during all this time, neither Betty nor I actually met Carl. We were just happy to hang out together and enjoy each other's company. That summer between our 10th and 11th grades, Carl was sent to his grandparents' ranch in Idaho. I was pretty upset for those 3 months until school started and Carl returned from Idaho. Even though Carl and I were not on official dates, I was beginning to have very strong feelings for him. I even provoked Betty to see if she was falling in love with Carl, but Betty had her eye on another guy from our class. Before school started in the fall, I already knew that I would find my permanent boyfriend in Carl. When he returned, it became obvious that something was wrong in his life. Finally, I got him to admit to me that his father was dissatisfied with his current assignment and was insisting that his superior officers transfer him to an active unit somewhere in Europe. The thought of moving again was very upsetting for both Carl and his mother. Within the first month of returning to school, Carl and I had our first date. I was in 7th heaven. I had someone I truly fell in love with. You might think it was childhood love or just a teenage crush, but in reality, it was something more. As Carl and I became exclusive to each other, we discovered that we were emotionally compatible and that our ideals were very similar. Even though we dated regularly, we never had intim. There were a few evenings where very intense petting took place in his parked car, but we never crossed the line. He never touched me or asked me to touch his genitals. Both Carl and I thought intimate should be saved for marriage. We often sat in his car, looked at the stars, and told each other different versions of what our lives would be like after we got married. Carl was adamant that he would not become an army officer like his father. He saw how all this moving from base to base affected his family's life. This was not the life he wanted for his new family. He was looking forward to settling down, putting down roots in one town with one woman and a house full of children. The holiday season came very quickly that year, or at least it seemed so to me. On Christmas Eve, Carl gave me a friendship ring, which he said was to be my pre-engagement ring. It was a very Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year for me. Spring was rapidly approaching, and as the bond between Carl and me grew stronger and stronger, I was afraid that he would be sent back to the ranch to live with his grandparents for the summer as soon as school ended. He said he would fight the decision and find a summer job somewhere in the city. It was the last month of the school year when the bomb exploded. Carl's father finally convinced his superior officers that he could make a greater contribution to the army while on active duty rather than in the reserves. He received orders to be transferred to Stuttgart, Germany. When Carl came to school the next day, I immediately knew something was terribly wrong. My first thought was that his father was going to send him to his grandparents for the summer again. When Carl said that he and his family were moving to Germany by the end of June, my world literally exploded. I became hysterical and had to be sent to the nurse's office for the rest of the school year. I was completely devastated. My grades dropped sharply. If it weren't for my previous high grades, I would never have made it to my senior year. All sorts of thoughts were running through my head. I even told Carl that we should run away and get married in secret, but Carl was more cool-headed. He knew we were too young to do it on our own. Finally, the day came when Carl's family went to the airport to start their new life in Germany. Our goodbye felt like someone had ripped out my heart while it was still beating. I was completely devastated. It's good that we didn't go to school in the summer. My parents saw how depressed I was and were able to get me into counseling and therapy before school started in September. Therapy really helped me, and I continued with it throughout my senior year. Carl and I wrote letters to each other every day. You have to remember that this was a time before the internet and email. Our letters were full of love and sadness at the same time. We missed each other, and I firmly believed that our absence had deepened our love for each other. I didn't date any other guys my senior year. In fact, I didn't even attend the end-of-the-year graduation party. I was Carl's girlfriend and remained faithful to him, no matter what. Instead of hunting and dating other boys in my senior class, I focused all my efforts on improving my GPA and scoring high on the academic assessment test. All these efforts paid off in the form of acceptance and a scholarship to UC Berkeley. My sister Evelyn was already a student at the University of California at Berkeley. She could help me move and start working on campus. All these wonderful things made me very happy. In his letters, Carl also praised my efforts and results. Problems in Germany, and I wasn't there to help him. If Evelyn had not helped me during the first months of university, I am sure that I would have been expelled. And during the Thanksgiving holiday, the first of my letters was returned with the note "Return to sender, address unknown." That little notice on the envelope was like a dagger piercing my heart. I did not receive letters from Carl for more than a month. Now it turns out that he did not receive any of my letters. I was a lost soul. It seemed like nothing in my life mattered to me anymore. I felt that I could die and would not regret leaving my empty world. Once again, Evelyn and her constant mothering gave me the strength to move forward. Eventually, I had to restart my therapy. This time, it was with a different therapist. Thanks to her help and guidance, I pulled myself together and again focused all my energy on my studies and future career. And yet, something deep inside was missing. It must have been a part of my soul because I felt spiritually numb and empty. After a whole year of not hearing anything from Carl, I pushed the memories of him into the background and essentially buried him. All of his previous letters were packed into several shoe boxes and stored in the back of my closet. As an additional note, Paul, you knew nothing about these letters. I kept them until the day you proposed marriage to me. Your love and this offer began to heal my wounded soul. That weekend, I burned all of Carl's letters and scattered the ashes in the San Francisco Bay. Carl was finally at peace for good, or so I thought. I never told you about him, and I told my entire family never to mention him to you or to me ever. What followed after college were 16 of the most wonderful years that a woman, wife, and mother could ever dream of in my entire life. You have to believe these words, Paul, they are the absolute truth. This next section of my explanation may seem strange, and some of it is absolutely absurd. This letter will contain something that defies logic and common reason. And yet, after all the dust from my words is settled, you will find one terribly tormented woman, a woman who had to face some very serious revelations in her life. As you know, one of my main responsibilities at Cable is to review and approve all subcontractors who perform work or services for Cable Next. My department's review process focuses on the subcontractor's past and present compliance with all state and federal labor laws. We do not enter into labor contracts with subcontractors who hire illegal immigrants or violate labor hour laws. To qualify for a contract with Cable Next, subcontractors must complete a lengthy application form. These applications are reviewed by 2 of my assistants, and those candidates who pass the initial screening are then sent to my office for review. On March 22nd, a stack of applications landed on my desk. There were 6 folders for my review, which I began immediately after lunch. The third folder I opened was a questionnaire from the construction company KG. I read the summary page that Loretta, my assistant, had done as part of her initial review. Her brief comments were very favorable to KG Construction, so I started reading the details in the application form. When I got to the company owner section, I felt like I had just hit a brick wall at 60 miles per hour. Carl Gehring is the sole owner of KG Construction. I don't know how long it took me to catch my breath after reading Carl's name on the application. My mind seemed to explode inside my head. Complete confusion reigned in my shocked mind. Could this man be my Carl Gehring? Could this man be the Carl Gehring who confessed his undying love to me so many years ago? The rest of that day was a waste for me. I told Loretta to do more research on KG Construction Company and its owner, Carl Gehring. That day, I left work early and returned home to try to gain control of my mind again. I needed you and the children by my side to strengthen the loving bond we share as a family. No matter how hard I tried, I could not completely push thoughts about Carl back into that dark, cold hole where the memory of him had been imprisoned for more than 20 years. I remember the 4 of us having a great family evening, chatting and enjoying games of Scrabble before the kids went to bed. I also remember that we didn't make love that night, although I was in the mood for you to take me intimately. The rest of the week felt like working in a forced labor camp. I tried my best to concentrate on daily tasks. Friday came and went, and Loretta was still checking the details of KG Construction Company. I deliberately made Saturday and Sunday completely crazy for myself. Every little project that I had put off until now was something I took on with gusto. You even noticed that I must have taken a double dose of my morning vitamins. It was a Herculean task to suppress in my mind the thoughts about Carl that did not allow me to take possession of him. On Monday morning, Loretta arrived with another small stack of application folders. She said that checking the information about KG Construction Company showed that it was at its best. She left my office and closed the door behind her. I remember looking at the top folder as if it were a poisonous snake ready to strike. It took me a few minutes of staring at the folder before I reached out and opened it. There, on the first biographical page, was all the information I needed to confirm that this Carl Gehring was, in fact, my Carl Gehring. The report also indicated that he had been single for 8 years since the divorce and lived in Gilmore, approximately 26 miles from my office. My body went cold as a flood of repressed memories hit my mind like a tsunami wave. All those feelings that I thought were long forgotten and buried rose up and shook me to the core. It was impossible for me to think about anything other than Carl and that youthful love that we shared so briefly 20 years ago. I turned to Evelyn again for advice and comfort. She knew that there was a serious problem when I came to her house early that afternoon to talk. She was the only living relative who knew about Carl and our relationship before his father was killed in Germany. She has always been my support and faithful advisor. Now I need her advice more than ever. After I told Evelyn about my discovery, she had a very puzzled look on her face. It took her a few minutes to collect her thoughts before she said that I should forget about Carl completely and let his memory rest in peace. Although it wasn't necessary, it reminded me of the fabulous life we lead as a family. She told me that Carl was in the past and had to stay in the past if I wanted to keep our family intact. I knew she was right. I knew I had everything a woman could want or expect in a loving family relationship. And yet, there was an annoying voice of curiosity in my mind that could not shut up. The next week, my curiosity could no longer be contained. I asked Loretta to make an appointment with Mr. Carl Gehring for the next day. Carl had no way of knowing who I was other than that I was the last person in the application approval process. He was simply asked to come to Mrs. Kathy Matthews' office the next afternoon. Despite my best efforts to control myself, my emotions were a raging inferno. What will happen during this first meeting? Will Carl remember me? Are there any feelings left between us? I didn't sleep very well that night. Driving to work that morning was like going to a wake. The anticipation was almost overwhelming. My conscience rebelled, every nerve in my body was frayed. At 2:30, there was a knock on my door, and Loretta stuck her head in to say that Mr. Carl Gehring had arrived for his 2:30 appointment. Carl came into my office, and Loretta closed the door. There was a split second when Carl looked at me with a confused expression on his face. Then he simply asked, "Katie, is that you?" "Katie?" I stood up from the table on legs that felt like they were made of rubber. "Yes, Carl, it's me, Katie." None of us knew what to say next. There was silence for a very long second. Then I told him to sit in front of my desk. I could see that Carl was in slight shock when he saw me for the first time in 20 years. He didn't know what he should do or say. I asked him how he was and commented on the fact that he looked very fit and healthy. Still, he found it difficult to cope with the situation. I changed the subject and then started telling him about the application approval process. He sat silently, not saying a word. When I told him that his application had been approved and that he would be able to contact the editing director to receive his contract assignments, how I managed to talk to him for more than 15 minutes without breaking down and turning into trembling jelly, I will never know. I simply smiled politely when I finished and asked if he had any questions regarding the contract or the job. He silently shook his head slowly, but his eyes never left my face. When I indicated that the meeting was over, he very slowly rose from his chair, rising to his feet. He seemed to finally be able to get over some of his initial shock. He thanked me for endorsing his company and then said he would like to meet me for lunch. I said we could meet the next day at Brandon's restaurant across the street from my office. He seemed pleased with my answer but still didn't know how to end the meeting, so he just smiled and said he would meet me at Brandon's the next day at noon. After Carl left my office, I leaned back in my chair, my chest tightened as I realized that the first love of my life had just risen from the dead. The next day at dinner, nothing happened except Carl telling me the grisly details of what happened after his father was killed. His mother had always been a fragile woman. The news of her husband's death caused her to have a nervous breakdown. She had to be placed in a psychiatric hospital. Now Carl was forced to take on the role of head of the family. He had to comfort and support his little sister. The army arranged for Carl and Jennifer to be sent back to live with their grandparents. Their mother remained in a mental institution. When Carl and his younger sister returned to Idaho, even before Carl and his sister moved in with their grandparents, they were told that their mother had committed suicide in the hospital. In a short period of time, less than a month, Carl and Jennifer became orphans. Carl said that his grief and the burden placed on him by the death of his parents were the main reasons he stopped writing to me. He felt he could no longer keep the promises he made to me. Other, more serious demands were also placed on him. He wanted me to be happy and move forward in my life, so he stopped writing in the hope that I would find another man to love. During our dinner conversation, Carl never made any statements about wanting to be a part of my life again. He knew that I was married and the mother of 2 children. I believe he was truly happy for me and for my life as your wife. The meal ended with a handshake as Carl headed to his car in the parking lot. I returned to my office and tried to get on with my daily work. Unfortunately for me, those early memories persisted, no matter how hard I tried to push them into the background. Evelyn kept telling me not to see Carl again and to forget about him. I no longer told her about my meetings with Carl. I was probably too ashamed to talk about my betrayal. Paul, I really tried to follow Evelyn's advice. For over a week, I struggled with my inner demons. The next week, I finally gave in and called Carl and asked if we could meet again for lunch. That next dinner was the beginning of my infidelity. There was no seduction or intimacy involved, but during our meal, I confessed to Carl that I had never stopped loving him. He admitted the same thing to me. At that moment, I realized that I needed Carl to become a part of my life again. It was I, Paul, not Carl, who set the wheels in motion on what became several intimate dates for us before you made your discovery. Somewhere in the following weeks, I became a different person. Somehow, I began to feel that I was two different women living in one body. When I was with you and the children, I was still the same loving wife and mother I always was. When I was with Carl, I was again that young girl who found her lost love and again held him in her arms. I knew it was wrong. There are no justifications, no arguments for my actions. All I can sincerely tell you, Paul, is that my love for you has not diminished at all. Contrary to many stories you may have read, there was never any rivalry between you and Carl in my mind. You were my husband, and he could never become my husband. These were my thoughts during those days of confusion for me. Never, and it's true, that I never thought about leaving you for Carl. All I can hope for at this point in our lives is that you will reconsider your decision to divorce. I don't want to be the former Mrs. Paul Matthews. I want to remain your wife and live together as we have lived since we got married. But as much as I would love to tell you that I would never see Carl again, I would only be lying to you. Carl is back in my life, and I don't want to lose him again. This should not be the case in marriage, my dear and beloved husband, but I can't help myself because I feel the way I do now. I wish we could somehow come to an agreement that would allow us to live together as the family we've always been and share it with my double life. If you find the strength to meet with me, maybe I can better explain my feelings and answer any questions you have about me. But, my dear husband, I desperately want to remain your loving wife. I love you now and forever, your loving wife, Katie. I sat with the letter in my hand. I now knew more about Carl and Katie than I previously knew about their past relationships. It may have been a lost, unfulfilled teenage romance for Katie and Carl, but I wouldn't have any part in making it happen. Katie's letter was a real confession, but it didn't change anything in my mind. Now I knew that there could never be complete reconciliation between us. She once again said that she needed Carl to be a part of her life. There was no way I could be part of this agreement. I put the letter back in the envelope and set it aside for later when I could let Jason and Christy read it and understand why their parents got divorced. I kept silent about reading the letter. Finally, a few days later, Evelyn stopped me and asked if I had read the letter. It doesn't change anything. Everything that Katie and I had for 16 years is now over. I don't want to date her or ever see her again. The divorce will be finalized next week. I turned and walked away from the very sad future daughter-in-law. The decision to divorce was made without my presence. I invited my lawyer to attend the hearing when the decree was made official. I was told that Katie was there and cried when the judge made his decision. I had a desire I should never have been forced to meet Katie face to face whenever necessary. I informed her about my plans for children through her sister. The instructions were simply that she should stay away from us and not try to interfere in our affairs. Essentially, she no longer existed in my world. 6 months after their divorce, Katie and Carl got married. Over the next 2 years, he and Katie had a baby boy. They remained living in Gilmore. Katie's close relationship with John and Christy continued over the years. Christy was especially excited when her mother gave birth to her new half-brother. After the divorce, I never met Katie or her family. In my opinion, she died on the day I made my fateful discovery. I remained a strict and loving father, completely devoting myself to my children as they grew up. I refused to go on dates with numerous women who have constantly tried to get into a relationship with me. Katie was the only woman I've ever loved enough to want intimacy instead of night and female companionship. I focused my attention on my children, my work, and even became involved in local politics. Love can be a magnificent thing, but love can also be a very destructive force when Cupid decides to play his pranks. This is what happened for Katie and me. Subscribe to our channel so that your second half doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think about listening to the next one. What do you think of our story today? It seems to me that after listening to this story, I felt a little bit bad about my husband and the way he was treated by his own wife. What is your opinion? Write in the comments. Until new videos.